Welcome to CSI 234 Windows Server. In this video, I'm going to discuss getting started with this course. Here we have our home page. The home page actually provides instructions on how to get started. Be sure to read through this section. Once you've read through this section completely, click the link that says before you get started. Upon clicking this link, it will take you to course preparation section and carefully navigate each of these links. I'll take a quick look at software requirements. Here to discuss the software that's required in order to complete the course, which includes VMware Workstation and then also Windows Server 2012 R2. You also need a copy of Windows 2008. If I click the link that says VMware Workstation, it'll take me to the website where you could download VMware Workstation for free. Once you click that link, you also have to click the software button, and here you see VMware Workstation 12. You'll be required to download this application if you don't already have it, and it requires your sign-in information, which is usually your student email address and some password that you provided. Let's go back to the course. So essentially that's all that's talked about on this page. The next page covers some requirements, system requirements, your technical specs, which browsers are compatible, and then a quick start guide for how to navigate Canvas. This is your academic integrity policy. Unfortunately, it doesn't load by default. You'll have to click this link. Once you click the link, it'll open the academic integrity policy. Again, be sure to read through this document before you get started. Click Next. This page outlines what's required week by week. Each week, you'll have a module objective, module activities, and module assessments. The assessments will include your graded assignments. And finally, a note about me, some of my certifications, office hours. And for online students, I communicate primarily through email. I will check email at least once per day, and over the weekend, maybe once during the course of a weekend, sometimes twice depending upon my workload. I'll click Next. On this page, please introduce yourself. Give a little bit of information about your program of study, maybe what your interests are and what you're currently doing. And then finally, we have the page where you can find the syllabus. If you click this link, it will allow you to download the syllabus here in your lower left. I'm using Google Chrome. Or you can view the syllabus right here on this page. There's a before you begin document. This is very important for getting started and making sure you have everything set up correctly. So here's the before you begin page. I will open it in my browser. And there's some things that I like to point out. This is regarding how we'll be working in this class. Everything will be done using virtualization. So you'll be using VMware Workstation 12, creating virtual machines within your host operating system. So if you're running Windows 7 or Windows 8 or a Macintosh Apple machine, you can use VMware. If it's a Mac, you'll use VMware Fusion or some other virtualization tool. If you're on a Linux box, you can run VMware on a Linux box, but you're on your own in terms of getting VMware installed and working properly on your Linux installation. Another note, Memory is critical to how many VMs you'll be able to run simultaneously. You'll want to have at minimum 4 gig of RAM in your host machine. I'm going to scroll down to my second page. Before I do so, where it says configure a partial lab, if you have minimal memory, you may not be able to do all the labs in the book. However, you'll be able to do all the labs that are assigned. Some of the other labs, if they're not assigned and you still would like to benefit from the lesson that that lab has to offer, you're certainly welcome to do so. And if you do, please let me know. Oftentimes I'll give some extra credit or extra thought to any additional work or assignments that's done. As I scroll down, you'll see a diagram of lab configuration. Again, this is critical. The IP addressing that you see here, in order to keep things standard from one student to the next, I would encourage you to use the IP addressing that's outlined. You'll notice there are 1, 2, 3, 4 servers here, and then one Windows 8 machine. I'm going to suggest that you build minimum 3 servers. You have your 410 server 1, which is this box here, and you see the IP addressing that's assigned to it. Then you'll have a 410 server 2, which is this machine here. IP addressing very similar, except the locally assigned IP. And then you have a 410 server core machine, which will be used for certain labs. Each of these machines point to a gateway and a DNS server that's located here. This router is performing as your router, your default gateway rather. And then we have a DNS server that's standalone, 10.10.1.200. In my implementation, I configure a DNS server and a NAT router on the same box, a Windows Server 2012 R2 machine that's been configured as a NAT router. That way, although I'm using my own private IP addressing, each machine, including Windows 8, can still access the internet, although my subnet 10.10.x.x is a private subnet. This is recommended. This will allow you to do each and every lab in the book, although once again certain labs won't be assigned. So just wanted to point that out. This is critical. We will be using VMware or virtualization for our labs. If you scroll further down the before you begin page, it will discuss more about the configuration, DNS, and your zone, how to name your zone. And then finally, on down to 410 Server 1. 410 Server 1 has this set of requirements. This is going to be the very first machine that you'll configure. Again, Windows Server 2012 R2, standard or data center, either one. I suggest standard. Data center requires a little bit more hard disk space, and that's a little bit of overkill for this class. Server name, I'm going to encourage you to stay with the standard 410 Server 1. Password, critical. Oftentimes, students will forget or somehow muff the password. I'll suggest that you use the password provided here just in case you need support, and that you avoid any pitfalls down the road. Memory, it says 1 gigabyte or more. Recommendation is to make your servers 1 gig. So if you do the math, if you've got 4 servers, each server contains a gig of memory, then that's going to consume all of your memory. There'll be no memory left for your host machine, and everything will bog down. That is, or that's if all of your servers are running at simultaneously or at the same time. So you want to be careful there. There are instances where you'll be required to have at least two servers running: 410 server 1, 410 server 2, and sometimes 410 server core. If those three machines are running, but you have a separate DNS machine, you're going to run into memory issues. So where we say that you should have a minimum of 4 gig of RAM, that will not allow you to do certain labs without shutting down some of the servers when they're not being used. Ideally, 8 gig is a good number to have. The machine that I'm using here has 6 gig of RAM, although I have another machine that has 8 gig, and I go back and forth between the two. But you'll have to figure out how to navigate that. Moving along, you'll configure 2 hard drives. VMware settings, you can configure as many hard drives as you need. So hard drive 1, 60 gigabyte or more, hard drive 2, 60 gigabyte or more. It is not necessary to use more than 60 gig. That's very sufficient. At least one network interface card on 410 server 1. And then finally, the work group that you will start out with is 410 server 2012. Configure within that work group. And then configure your primary DNS suffix for 410 server 2012.local. And make sure that this is configured in each of your servers and that it's conventional or standard. Chapter 4 discusses requires a third hard disk. Again, you'll know how to do that from the onset. And it tells you that if you're using virtualization, you can just add the new virtual disk with virtualization software. So this is done in VMware settings. And then finally, it gives you the IP address, default gateway, DNS. We don't have to configure Windows Update at this point, because Windows Update will only work if your server is connected to the internet. And we've not done that. The only way your server will be connected to the internet is if you configure a NAT router. And we'll do that later. I'll demonstrate in another video how to configure your Windows Server 2012 as a NAT router. It says the network location must be set to private. This trips up a lot of students. I'll walk through how to configure your network location for private, and that'll prevent some of the issues that some students have run into in the past. In fact, it looks like it gives you the steps here. 1 through 4 talks about how to set your network to private. Be sure to complete each of these steps. This is critical for labs that occur down the road. Okay, that will get us started in terms of configuring our very first server, which is required for Lab 1. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to close or at least minimize the Before You Begin page. That way, if I need to refer back to it, I still have it up. And I'm also going to minimize my browser. I'm going to start building my first server. Here's VMware Workstation. I've already downloaded it. If you need some assistance in downloading VMware Workstation, there's a document that's been posted. Let's see if I can show you where that document is really quick. So if I go back to modules, and here's the how to access and download VMware Workstation and Windows Server 2012. If you click this link, here's a document that explains how to download the software you need. So if I open that document, here it is. And then it walks you through where to find and how to download VMware Workstation and Windows Server 2012 R2. Both are free of charge to students. And this will get you started. Okay, I'm going to close this page. Let's go back to VMware Workstation. So as this launches, you'll see I built 410 Server 1 already, but I'm going to delete this one and I'll start from scratch. So let's right click, remove, click remove, and so it's gone. Once you open VMware Workstation, you come into the home page. This is your evaluation period ends in 379 days. I thought I licensed this already. You get a license when you download VMware Workstation, and if you apply the license, then it doesn't expire. Your evaluation period doesn't expire, I believe. Okay, create a new virtual machine. Click the link. I typically go with the typical installation. Click next, and then browse to your disk image file. The disk image file for Windows Server 2012 would have been downloaded from DreamSpark, and you place it anywhere you like on your system. Maybe create a folder for applications and throw it in there. So highlight that file, click open, and click next. We don't have to give it a product key just yet, although when you download the file, a product key will be provided, and that's the key you'll want to use. You can plug it in at this point, but I'm going to leave mine blank for now. Version of Windows to install. We want to install Windows Server 2012 R2 Standard Edition. Full name, I'm going to type in my full name here. And then password, we'll give it that default password. Unless you have one that you use for everything, that you know you're going to remember. Again, it's probably best to go with the password provided. Click next, and they'll give you this message about the product key, and we can say yes, let's continue. We'll put the product key in later. And so virtual machine name. The virtual machine name and the actual machine name are two different things. This is just what it's going to be named when you pull up VMware Workstation. So I'm going to call it 410 Server 1. And then location. Location, it's asking me where I want the virtual machine to be installed. This can eliminate confusion down the road. Oftentimes, students will install the virtual machines all in the same subfolder. Maybe back here where it says virtual machines. But what you'll want to do is whatever virtual machine name you give, you want to make sure there's a folder created with that same virtual machine name so that the files associated with this VM go into its respective subfolder. So all of your VMs will be in their own subfolder. I believe that's critical to helping you maintain organization. Okay, so we'll click next. At this point, it's going to create the hard drive, and I have it set for 60 gigabyte, which is sufficient. This asks, do we want to store the virtual disk as a single file or split it into multiple files? Let's store it as a single file. Click next. Customize hardware. Be sure to follow these steps, please. Memory. Here's defaulting to 2 gig. Remember, this is critical. We're going to change this to 1 gig. So I'm going to click 1 here. And then click where it says new CD/DVD. Click advanced and set this for legacy emulation. This allows your CD-ROM drive to communicate with your virtual machine. And then lastly, click network adapter. In this section, you want to select bridged mode, and then I always click replicate physical network connection state. This will eliminate issues down the road too with your virtual machines communicating with each other. This always works for me. Oftentimes, students will have trouble with their VMs, and once they do this, that seems to solve a lot of issues. Okay, I think that's it for now. I think they did ask for 2 hard drives, hard disk 1 and hard disk 2. Let's go ahead and add that second hard drive. So in order to add another hard drive, I go here, click the add button. User account UAC is up. And I'm going to add a second hard drive. Where is it? looks like it. Add a generic SCSI device. No, that's not it. Must not be in the right place because I don't see hard drive. I'm going to come back and add the hard drive later. So let's cancel this. I'm not sure why I'm not seeing. I think I may have to go ahead and build the machine and come back and add the hard drive later. Okay, let's do that. All right, let's close this and then click Finish. So it's going to go ahead, build the shell, my virtual machine shell. At this point, the shell is built. Now it's locating the ISO, which is Windows Server 2012 ISO, and it's going to start the install. It sees my headset, and so I'm going to go tell it to go ahead and use the headset. We see setup starting. We'll also see my VM name, 410 Server 1. And then here we have the Windows setup screen. It's going to go through a copy process, get the files ready for installation. It's going to install some features, updates, and then it's going to finish up. And I'm going to go ahead and pause while this process completes, and then I'll come back once this process has completed. Okay, once it's gone through the install, it's going to tell you that Windows needs to restart to continue. And so once it restarts, I think it's going to prompt you for the password to actually log in, but let's see. taking longer than usual, but we'll be patient. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and pause and then come back once it's done. Okay, yeah, after spinning for some time, it was going through installing features. And so uh, now it's setting up the profile, and it should give me control here shortly or momentarily. Yes, VMware Tools. That is another application that you want to be sure to install. It's going to make your VMs run much more smoothly and to be able to navigate between VMs. So be sure to install VMware Tools. And it looks like it's installing automatically. And sometimes that it doesn't occur. It doesn't install automatically. So be sure to go back and do that if it doesn't. So right now I've clicked inside the virtual machine. And so if VMware installed VMware Tools, it will allow you to click inside the machine or outside the machine. If VMware Tools isn't installed, you have to press Control Alt to navigate between the two. And as you can see, this VM does have internet access currently, but once I configure the IP addressing based on specs provided, I'm going to lose that connection. VMware Tools is still installing. In fact, it takes a little while for this as well. But it is critical. And I'm going to go ahead and pause once again until VMware Tools is completely installed, and I'll be right back. Okay, after Windows VMware Tools installed, forced to restart or reboot, and the system has come back online. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and log in. Control Alt Insert. And then whatever password you provided. And so now I'm logged in, and I'm going to open Server Manager. But before I do so, I'm going to go back to my Before You Begin page, because that's the page that's going to have the requirements. My IP address, the actual memories, that's all been provided. My DNS suffix information I'll need, IP, default gateway, DNS, and I'm also going to configure network location for private. Okay. In Server Manager, since I know that I want to configure the local server, I can click Configure this server. It's going to take me into local server mode. And we see here that the computer name by default is this name here. But my VMware name is 410 Server 1. I want my computer name to also be 410 Server 1. So we'll start there. Let's click this link. Change. And my computer name is 410. Let me turn on numlock here. 410. Why is this my numlock not on? 410 Server 1. Okay. Work group based on the Before You Begin page is I think it's 410 Server 2012. Let's go back to the Before You Begin page so I can make sure we're doing it verbatim. Workgroup 410 Server 2012 as identified here. And then lastly, if I click the More button, here's my primary DNS suffix. That needs to be 410 Server 2012.local. And let's click OK there. And then OK once again. Okay, it's updated my work group. It wants to perform a restart. I'm going to say OK here and then click close, and let's tell it to restart later because I want to go ahead and finish configuring IP addressing and some other items. Okay, so we've gotten the computer name and work group modified. Let's change the IP address. I click this link for Ethernet 0, right click and go to Properties. Let's change the IPv4 address. Highlight it, click Properties. We're going to specify the address is 10.1. Let me make sure I get that right. No, 10.10.1.1. It's going to be a /16. So it's 255.255.0.0. And then for my default gateway, now here's where it gets a little tricky, because we told it that we are going to, well, I mentioned to you actually that we're going to build a NAT router. My NAT router is going to be my default gateway. I'm going to make the NAT router and DNS server the same box. And in doing so, and let me open that Before You Begin page. And in doing so, I'm going to go ahead and use 10.10.1.200 for my DNS server and my NAT router address. So I can plug that in now. Although the DNS isn't built yet and my router isn't built yet, I know that I plan to use 10.10.1.200. Let's go back to my VM. Let's make that 10 dot, oops, dot 10.1.200. And so for preferred DNS, this is all also tricky in a lot of cases. The preferred DNS is going to be 10.10.1.200. Remember, my DNS server and default gateway will be one and the same. And you'll see when I configure my DNS server, DNS always has to point to itself on the DNS server. That's something to remember, and I'll point that out again when we build the DNS server. But for now, this is perfect. Just click OK. Click Close. It's going to update my IP information. Notice I also lost internet connectivity. And so that part is done. And I'm going to close this. And so we've got an IP address reconfigured, my work group, computer name, that will update once I restart. And then there were a couple other items. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and perform a server restart. One thing I want to change is enhanced security. IEC. It's on now. I'm going to turn that off for administrators. That way, whenever I go to a web page, I'm not being prompted for approval. Let's click OK. And then let's perform a restart. Go to Task, shut down local server, click here and select Restart. Click in the comment box, and I usually will hit the space bar and click OK, and it'll go ahead and restart my box. While the box is restarting, I'm going to go ahead and pause and be back momentarily. Okay, my server's coming back online. Doesn't take long to reboot now that everything's installed. And I'm building this on probably the slowest computer I have in my house. This is a very old box. This box is about 7 or 8 years old. Not the fastest machine. So if I'm using a really old box to do this work, I'm sure just about any computer you have at your place, you'll be able to do the same thing. We're still waiting. Okay, here we go. Control Alt Insert. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and set my network to private. And so we're going to point back to this document where it walks you through 410 Server 1 setup. This section is what we'll do next. The network location must be set to private. So in doing so, we're going to go to Server Manager, Tools, Local Security Policy. Minimize this. Let's open Server Manager. And also I'm going to go ahead and go full screen. Tools is still loading. Local security policy. I guess it's thinking. There we go. Slide this down to the center. And then in local security policy, I'm going to click Network List Manager Policies. Double click All Networks. And in the Network Location section, click User Can Change Location. User can change location. And then click Apply. And then OK. And so we're going to close this window. And down here where it says click the network you're connected to, I'm connected to the unidentified network. Let's go to right click, open Network and Sharing Center. And if I look at my network is configured as public still, and I have to configure this for private. And let's click, make sure we have it set for private in the network locations. It's thinking. Any day now. Close this. Oh, here we go. Private. Then click Apply. And then OK. And now I think we're good. So if I go back here and I look at my network, it says private. This is critical. This gets in the way of a few things down the road if not done, especially when trying to ping from one server to another. So you want to make sure you perform or conduct these steps. All right, we'll close this out. I'm going to shrink this page. Let's close this window. I'm going to go to local server just to verify that my computer name's updated, and it has. My work group is right. My Windows firewall has public turned on. Let's see, it has private turned on. This may get in the way of some things, but we're going to wait. If we find that we have trouble pinging from one server to another, we'll come back and we'll adjust the firewall rule settings. But for now, I'm going to leave it alone. Here's my IP address, 10.10.1.1. IPv6 is enabled. That's okay. I've got enhanced security configuration turned off. Windows updates is not enabled. And we're good. 1 gigabyte of RAM, and my total disk space is 60 gigabyte. One other thing that we didn't do, it called for 2 hard drives. Let's go to VM and then click VM settings and see if we can add that second hard drive. Okay, here's my hard disk, the first one. Let's go to options. Let's see hard disk. Let's click add. And here's hard disk. So it wouldn't allow me to do it during the initial configuration or the initial build, but once it's built and functioning, I can go in and add a second hard drive. And the way that I did that, I'll back out, VM, settings, then click add under the hardware tab. I click add, and let's add an additional hard drive. We're going to make that hard drive a SATA. This is SCSI's recommended, but we generally use SATA. And I generally leave this unchecked, independent or for RAID. And then next, we're going to create a new virtual disk. And we're going to make it 60 gigabyte. And we're going to store it as a single file. And then we're going to click next. And then finish. And so I now have 2 hard drives in my machine for this machine. Okay, we see new hard disk 60 gig and the original hard disk 60 gig. And let's click OK. And so we've finished or completed 410 Server 1 in getting it built. At this point, you can work through Lab 1 assignment. Good luck.